Would you have survived the cold, the hunger, and the endless sea with nothing but stone tools and fire? The night presses in around you, heavy and absolute. The air is sharp, slicing into your lungs with every breath. Your fingers are numb, cracked, raw from the bite of the wind. The ground beneath your feet groans and shifts, ice, stretching endlessly, alive and restless. The sea lies before you like a wound in the earth, black and infinite, its surface broken by shards of drifting ice that scrape and collide with hollow thunder. Somewhere out there, past that shifting darkness, is survival. Behind you is only death. You hear it in the coughs of the old, in the thin cries of children whose bodies cannot fight the cold. You see it in the hollow eyes of those beside you, eyes that reflect the firelight, desperate, haunted, already half resigned to fate. The fire is small. Too small. It spits and hisses in the wind, a fragile spark against the vastness of the night. It cannot hold back the Arctic. Nothing can. The sea is merciless. You know it will claim some of you. The waves are high, the winds cruel, and the boats are little more than stitched skin stretched over fragile frames of bone and wood. They are not built for kindness. They are built for hope, and hope alone. And still, you step closer. Because to stay is to starve, to freeze, to vanish. To leave is to risk everything. The hunger is a voice inside you, clawing, relentless. Your stomach twists, empty for days. The land you left behind has given all it can, no roots remain, no animals stir. Even the sky seems against you, the sun a fleeting ghost that vanishes too soon, surrendering you once more to the crushing dark. The choice is brutal, to cross, or to die. And so you imagine the journey. The salt of the sea stinging your lips, the spray freezing on your face, the sound of paddles cutting through black water that hides endless depths. You imagine storms rolling in from nowhere, waves like mountains rising above you, threatening to dash you into nothing. You imagine the silence when the storm passes, broken only by the creak of your vessel and the fearful breaths of those beside you. Would you have found the strength to go on? To face the unknown, knowing each mile could be your last? Would you have clutched the fire close, shielding it with your body, praying it would survive the crossing with you? Or would you have turned back, choosing the certainty of death on land over the uncertainty of death at sea? This was not simply a journey. It was not migration as you know it. It was the crucible of humanity, the moment when survival meant defying the very elements that conspired to erase you. Across the sea. Into the Arctic. Against the impossible. They went. How did they do it, and why risk everything? The world they stepped into was not the world you know. The earth itself was caught in a grip of ice, an age of shifting climates that tore the land between life and death. Great sheets of frozen water stretched down from the poles, glaciers grinding across continents, carving valleys, swallowing forests, crushing rivers beneath their weight. The air was colder, sharper, crueler, every breath a reminder that the planet was not made for comfort but for struggle. The seas were not calm borders but barriers of terror. They froze at the edges, fractured into jagged shards that drifted like knives upon the current. Winter was not a season, it was the law of the land. Darkness lingered for months, light retreating into memory. And when the sun did return, it came pale and weak, offering no promise of warmth. Across these endless white deserts moved creatures that dwarfed the humans who dared to walk beside them. Woolly mammoths roamed the tundra, vast and armored in fur, their tusks curling like scythes. Saber-toothed cats prowled in silence, their fangs glinting in the half-light, hunting the desperate and the weak. Giant ground sloths, towering and slow, ripped trees apart for food. The megafauna of this age were not companions, they were obstacles, threats, forces of nature in themselves. And yet, for early humans, these beasts were both danger and salvation. A mammoth could trample an entire band into the earth, but its death could feed that band for weeks, clothe them, arm them with tools carved from its bones. The line between predator and prey blurred, and survival meant daring to challenge giants. Time itself felt unstable. The Earth's climate shifted without warning, glaciers advancing and retreating, rivers swelling and disappearing, coastlines vanishing under rising seas only to return when the waters froze again. Paths that once led to safety became impassable, and survival demanded constant movement. Humans became wanderers not by choice, but by necessity. Migration was not a plan, it was desperation. They walked because standing still meant extinction. Every horizon held the chance of death, but also the whisper of food, shelter, life. To the south, deserts burned and withered. To the north, ice expanded like a predator devouring the land. And so they moved, tracing the edges of continents, skirting glaciers, building lives on borrowed land before the earth reclaimed it. The world was alive, hostile, shifting, and it gave no mercy to the fragile creatures who dared to walk upon it. They were small, thin-skinned, slow-footed, with nothing but stone, wood, and fire to defend them. Yet they endured. They looked into the vastness of this brutal world and chose not to surrender, but to carve a place within it. Most people watching right now will quietly disappear without subscribing, even though they're fascinated by this journey. Don't be one of them. If you truly respect the struggles of our ancestors, honor their story. Subscribe to Tale of History. The sea was the final wall. A shifting expanse of black water, endless and merciless, that stood between humanity and survival. To approach it was to stare into a void that could not be tamed, a moving grave that swallowed without warning. The waves rose like living things, crushing wood, tearing skin, dragging bodies into depths where no light lived. For early humans, it was not simply water, it was terror given form. And yet, they built. With nothing but instinct, bone, and memory, they began to shape vessels that could float upon this living death. Trees were hollowed by fire and stone, carved into crude dugouts that could barely hold the weight of a family. Skins of animals were stretched tight over frames of bone and wood, stitched with sinew, sealed with fat. Primitive rafts, bound with vines, shuddered and groaned with every wave. These were not ships of strength. They were fragile answers to a question the earth itself demanded. Will you move, or will you die here? The crossings were acts of desperation. No charts, no maps, no knowledge of what lay beyond the horizon, only hunger pressing from behind, forcing them forward. The sea offered nothing in return but doubt. Each paddle stroke was a gamble. Behind them, the land crumbled into famine, predators, and ice. Ahead of them stretched silence, storms, and horizons that promised no safety. When storms rose, they came without warning. Winds howled like beasts, tearing skin from bone, snapping rafts as if they were twigs. Rain struck with the weight of stones, freezing upon skin, soaking firewood, extinguishing the only thing that kept them alive. A single wave could capsize a boat, scattering bodies across the water like leaves. In the darkness, there was no way back. Some disappeared. Bands of families, entire groups, swallowed by waves, leaving no trace, no memory but the silence that followed. And still, others tried. Because they understood what every survivor learns, to remain is death, but to move is possibility. The seas they crossed were many, the narrow throat of the Red Sea, its waters raging between Africa and Arabia, the frozen corridors of Beringia, where ice and ocean intertwined in lethal harmony. These were not paths made for them, yet they forced their way across, driven by need that outweighed fear. Every crossing was a test of human defiance. To step into those boats was to accept death as a companion, to acknowledge that at any moment the water could claim you. But it was also to declare that survival mattered more than fear, that life was worth gambling against impossible odds. They risked their lives crossing seas with nothing but courage, yet some of you won't even risk clicking subscribe. Strange, isn't it? The sea released them, but what awaited was no salvation. Land rose from the waves not as refuge but as another trial, a frozen desert where life clung by the thinnest of threads. The Arctic was vast and merciless, a world where the horizon was nothing but ice and sky, where the ground lay locked beneath permafrost, and where silence stretched so deep it pressed upon the mind. Here, the nights grew endless, swallowing weeks into darkness, broken only by the shimmer of cold stars. The wind did not whisper, it screamed, tearing at flesh, hollowing the bones with cold. Every breath burned, every step was a fight against the numbness creeping into fingers and toes. The air tasted of iron and frost, and the body weakened under its weight. This was no land for the unprepared, yet early humans did not turn back. They adapted, or they died. Fire became more than warmth, it became life itself. Carried across the sea in smoldering embers, shielded against wind and rain, it was fed like a living child, never allowed to die. At night, families huddled close, the flames their only barrier against a darkness filled with predators whose eyes glowed in the distance. Fire cooked the meat that kept them alive, hardened the spears that brought down prey, and held back the cold that sought to hollow them from within. Animal skins became armor. Stripped from the carcasses of reindeer, seals, and mammoths, they were sewn with sinew into heavy garments that wrapped the body in layers of survival. Bones became needles, hides became shelter, tusks became tools. In this way, the dead gave life to the living. They hunted together, for no single human could survive alone. Spears tipped with stone and fire were thrust into the sides of beasts far stronger than they were. The kill was not triumph but desperation, a gamble of life against starvation. What they could not eat, they preserved, what they could not preserve, they carved into tools. Even the bones of their prey rose around them as walls, lashed with hide to form shelters against the wind. Archaeologists have uncovered these bone dwellings, silent testimonies of ingenuity in a place where no one should have endured. Beside the hunts, they learned to draw sustenance from water. Holes cut into frozen rivers yielded fish pulled from beneath the ice, a steady supply where land failed. Harpoons tipped with sharpened bone pierced the skin of seals, their fat burned for light and warmth when wood could not be found. Every act was survival, every moment a negotiation with a land determined to erase them. Our ancestors braved the Arctic to ensure humanity survived. And here we are, telling their story, yet many will still refuse to subscribe to Tale of History. If you won't, at least explain in the comments why their story isn't worth remembering. Survival was never an accident. It was forged, hammered out against ice, hunger, and death. Every step forward demanded an answer to a single question: how do we endure? And the answer came not from chance, but from the mind. The first tools were not weapons of war, but of survival. A branch, hardened in fire, became a spear sharp enough to pierce the hide of a bison. Stone, fractured at the right angle, became a blade, crude, but deadly efficient. These fragments of innovation turned the hunted into the hunter. And with each invention, humanity pulled itself one step further from extinction. Archaeology uncovers this story in pieces. Preserved blades chipped from flint. Scrapers that thinned animal hides into clothing. Even fragments of tailored garments, stitched with bone needles, evidence that our ancestors refused to let cold strip them of life. Each artifact whispers the same truth: survival was not luck. It was ingenuity. Shelters, too, bore this mark of invention. Where no trees grew, they raised bones into walls. Mammoth ribs arched into frames, covered in hide stretched tight, creating havens against the wind. These were not simple huts, they were fortresses against death itself. In those frozen plains, where night could last weeks, a fire inside a bone house was more than warmth. It was a declaration: we will not vanish. Innovation was not just physical, but psychological. Each tool required foresight, a mind that could see beyond the present hunger to the next hunt, the next storm, the next generation. The survival of humanity was carved in stone, sewn in sinew, hardened in flame. And yet, think about this: if a single tool had never been made, if one spark of invention had failed to ignite, none of us would be here. Entire bloodlines would have vanished into snow, forgotten and unnamed. The fire-hardened spear, the blade of flint, the sewn garment, these were not just tools. They were the difference between life and oblivion. And here is the uncomfortable truth. They risked everything to invent, to survive, to give you the chance to exist. But many watching this now will still walk away, pretending their story is just another video. No. This is the origin of us all. If you cannot honor it with something as simple as a subscription, then perhaps ask yourself, are you the kind of person who discards survival stories as disposable? Think about it, if those tools were never invented, none of us would exist. Yet, even now, some will walk away without subscribing, as if survival stories are disposable. Are you one of them? The story of survival is never just about flesh and bone. When the bitter winds howled across the tundra, when frost gnawed at the skin and hunger hollowed the stomach, something else stirred within our ancestors. Not just the will to endure, but the need to create meaning in the chaos. Around the fire, shadows danced on the walls of caves and shelters built from mammoth bone. It was here, in the glow of flame, that humans first became more than survivors. They became storytellers. With sparks rising into the darkness, they told of hunts gone wrong, of spirits that haunted the icy wastes, of the dead who should not be forgotten. The fire was warmth, yes. But it was also memory. It turned silence into narrative, suffering into lesson. Archaeology whispers these truths back to us. We find carved bones etched with patterns not meant for utility, but for expression. Burials layered with red ochre, stones carefully placed around bodies, animal teeth woven into clothing, not accidents, not mere disposal. These were acts of belief, signs that humans carried an idea larger than themselves, that death was not an end, but a passage. Community was survival's secret weapon. Alone, a human froze. Together, they endured. A hunt required cooperation, spears aligned, drives timed, traps set with precision. To fail was starvation. To succeed was life extended for one more brutal season. Trust became as vital as fire. Betrayal was death. And in this cold crucible, culture emerged as both shield and mirror. The myths told by firelight hardened the mind against despair. Rituals gave order to the unknown. Cooperation built bonds thicker than blood. This was not chance. This was design, survival through meaning. To endure the world outside, humanity had to build a world within. But here lies the haunting truth, for every tale preserved in carvings and artifacts, countless voices were lost in the snow. Forgotten tribes. Extinguished bloodlines. Cultures that created, believed, and then vanished, leaving only the faintest trace in bone dust beneath the ice. We are their descendants. Their silence is our inheritance. Think carefully about this. Our ancestors carved meaning into the dark so that their lives would not vanish into nothing. Yet many watching this will click away, leaving no trace, no acknowledgement. Do not repeat their silence. If their struggles mean something to you, subscribe to Tale of History. Show that their stories are worth remembering. The winds of the Arctic still whisper of them. The hunters who crossed frozen rivers, the mothers who wrapped their children in animal skins, the fathers who dared the unknown seas. Their bones may be scattered beneath the tundra, beneath ancient coastlines swallowed by rising waters, but their legacy lives on, in you, in me, in everyone who draws breath today. Migration was never just a movement across landscapes. It was a rewriting of destiny. Every step across the Bering Land Bridge, every fire lit against the endless dark, carved the genetic map of modern humanity. That is why echoes of those ancient wanderers are still found in the DNA of people from Siberia to the Americas. They were not only survivors, they were the architects of possibility. Archaeologists uncover remnants that speak of this journey. Obsidian tools carried hundreds of miles from their origin, burial mounds with shells from distant shores, traces of languages and myths passed across continents like fire leaping from torch to torch. These are not accidents. They are the fingerprints of resilience. Proof that when our species was tested, we did not break. We adapted. But remember the cost. For every migration, there were those who never reached the other side. Children frozen in the arms of their mothers. Men swallowed by ice, never to be found. Families splintered by the gamble of survival. Yet those who endured carried something greater than flesh or blood. They carried the future. The modern world, its cities, its technologies, its fragile order, stands only because of their unrelenting march. Strip away the skyscrapers and satellites, and what remains is the truth: we are still migrants, still explorers, still haunted by the urge to push beyond the horizon. The same hunger that drove them across seas and ice is the hunger that will one day drive us to other planets. That is their legacy, to never stop moving forward, even when the night is long and the cold is merciless. Humanity was not shaped in comfort, but in suffering. And from that suffering came strength. You've just followed humanity's greatest migration step by step. You've walked through storms, crossed seas, and braved the Arctic night alongside them. If you won't subscribe to Tale of History after this, then at least confess in the comments, why turn away from the very story that defines who you are? The fires burn low now, but their light still lingers, etched not in ash or ember, but in us. We began with a question. A simple one, though heavy with consequence: would you have survived? Think of it again, now, after all you've seen. The storms that shattered bone. The seas that swallowed whole families. The nights when the cold pressed against the skin like knives. Could you have carried a child across the ice? Could you have hunted in the dark, knowing that one wrong step meant the end of your bloodline forever? For them, there was no choice. It was survival or extinction. And in that merciless equation, they chose endurance. They did not endure for glory. They did not endure for monuments or kingdoms or the weight of history. They endured for us. Across seas, through ice, against impossible odds, they endured. Their footprints pressed into snow that has long since melted, their cries swallowed by winds that never rest, their stories dissolved into silence. Yet here we stand, living proof of their victory. Every breath you take is a testament to their resilience. Every moment of. So when you ask, would I have survived, remember, you already have. Not because of your strength, but because of theirs. Your survival is borrowed. Your existence is the inheritance of lives spent in hunger, in fear, in defiance of the dark. Now the fire fades. The Arctic night closes in. But the story does not end, it burns inside us still, a reminder that humanity was forged not in comfort, but in struggle. That our beginning was written not in peace, but in endurance. And so the question remains. Not would you have survived then, but will you honor their survival now? You have seen what it cost for you to exist. Their blood is in your veins, their endurance in your breath. Don't let their story vanish into silence. Subscribe to Tale of History, so their fire is carried forward. And if you choose not to, then answer honestly in the comments, why turn away from the very struggle that gave you life?